Good morning, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to this Mother's Day first of a kind of virtual services. So I'm going to do the talk that I prepared on Mother's Day, and I hope you enjoy it. Obviously, this is difficult times, and I hope that everybody is blessed and that we'll be blessed by this morning. I have some PowerPoints that I've presented, so I hope you can see them as well because they go with the talk. So happy Mother's Day. And what does that make you think of? I will keep just pressing the slides on as well. I'll briefly mention the usual rhetoric of reminding everybody in Britain that it started as Mothering Sunday, a day when those in service got a day off to go home to their mother church and visit their home and their mother. But in America, it was a lady called Anna Jarvis who started it, who wanted to honour her mother. It was also founded out of a movement to reunite families after the Civil War. What's also clear is that it's become a celebration of mothers, their achievements, and motherhood and maternal bonds in general. It's celebrated in different ways all around the world. I've also read recently that it's one of the most emotional days of the year for many people, and there will be many people who wouldn't come to church on Mother's Day and really want to hide away from the day because it's too upsetting for them. And many who will actually won't go out on this day. There are websites now I've found out and I've noticed that actually ask you if you want to opt out of Mother's Day adverts because it's too upsetting. One thing is for certain, that we all have mothers or have had mothers at one point. And if you're sitting back and thinking this isn't relevant to me because I'm not a mother or I'm a man, then you will find out that the relationship of mothers is part of society in general, and it's much more complex and wonderful than you might think, and it affects everybody. There are also, I must mention, times when men are nurturing and caring, and that's the nature of families, and I want to celebrate them as well. We also love and cherish fathers. We couldn't and wouldn't be without you, but today we're celebrating mothers. In this church now and online, there are many of you who are grieving the loss of your mother. And for the first few years of coming to church, I cried copiously and didn't like Mother's Day at all because I was grieving for my mum. And there will be many who are estranged or have strained relationships with their mothers and long for them to be restored. There are those who are mothers and long to restore or improve relationships with their children. Some who may have had to give up children for adoption or fostering because of various circumstances. There are those who have adopted or fostered children and still think of the sadness that the birth mother will feel each year. There are many people who have longed to be mothers, but for a variety of reasons it's never happened, or sadly their children have died. The Bible calls us to recognise those feelings. In Romans 12:15 we're asked to mourn with those who mourn, and ignoring those feelings is not what God calls us to do. He isn't an advertising campaign, perfect family God with 2.4 smiling happy children. As a midwife for many years, people used to say to me, what a lovely job, dealing with joy and new life all the time. While that was true in many instances, and I still meet mothers and fathers with whom I was able to share the early stages of the birth of new life, it was, and still is, absolutely miraculous, and nothing will ever come close to being part of that, a new person being in the world, and we can celebrate and enjoy that. However, we live in a fallen world, one where life is not always as we planned it. I remember distinctly going back to work only a couple of weeks after my own miscarriage of a much longed for baby, to be greeted by a woman who came to see me in much anguish because she had found out she was pregnant with a fourth child who she couldn't see how she could cope with. I was obviously professional and caring, but then had to go in another room for a while when she'd left, to cry and wonder why this was happening. I also saw lots of other heartbreak and suffering and anxiety around the pregnancy and birth time. I did a study at one point on domestic violence during pregnancy, and because of many varied reasons, increased pressure on finances and increased vulnerability, the rate more than doubles during pregnancy. Mental health can often deteriorate because of various factors. Like anything in this world that is worth doing, it's very hard at times being a parent. What does the Bible say about it all? There are many instances of maternal references about God himself. The first of which is right at the beginning in Genesis 1, when the reference of God hovering or brooding over the waters is described by some scholars as similar to a female bird brooding over her nest. So right from the beginning of the universe, when God was speaking it into being, he used a motherly metaphor. It was always part of his plan that a maternal, nurturing part of the world was necessary. I want to make it clear that I'm not advocating that we think of or call God Mother. That is another discussion entirely. Jesus told us to call him Father, and that is what we should do. I'm certainly happy to do that. And obedience to God is knowing that whatever he tells us, because he loves us, because he loves us completely and utterly. Francis Chan, who is of Chinese origin, says that if God said to him that all Chinese people should stand on their head, then he would do it, because even though he doesn't understand the reason now, he trusts God enough to know that that's the best thing for him. I love to think that God is so amazing and multifaceted that each one of us is reflecting a unique part of him. He created us in his own image, male and female. He created us. And he saw that it was good. Each one of us is his creation. The other verses we've had read today also have maternal nature to them. Isaiah 49:15 says, "Can a woman forget her nursing child, that she should have no compassion on the son of her womb? Even these may forget, yet I will not forget you. Behold, I've engraved you on the palms of my hands." One of the things that some mother birds do, like turkeys for example, is to protect their young by covering them with their wings. They do this in storms in particular. It is a particularly maternal thing to do. God refers to himself in these. Deuteronomy 32:11, like an eagle that stirs up its nest and hovers over its young. Psalm 91:4 is one of my very favourites. He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge. Like an eagle that stirs up its nest, that flutters over its young, spreading out its wings, catching them, bearing them on its pinions, the Lord alone guided him. Luke 13:34, Jesus puts himself in that same role too. "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it, how often I would have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings." Paul continues the theme. He describes his concern for the Thessalonians in mothering terms. In his first letter to this church, he describes his concern for them as being like that of a nursing mother. He writes, "Nor did we seek glory from men, either from you or from others, when we might have made demands as an apostle of Christ. But when we were gentle among you, just as nursing mother cherishes her children." Mothering and mothers themselves are a very high priority in the Bible. A note, though, that often the word for mother and grandmother are interchangeable. The last thing that Jesus did before he went to the cross was make sure his mother Mary was looked after. And now we'll look at mothers in the Bible to see what God says about them. They're great examples. Mary, first of all, is a great example of a mother. She's obedient and devout and yet ordinary. God often does extraordinary things through ordinary people. She was the only person who was there when he was born and when he died. Like most mothers, she didn't understand everything going on, but she treasured the things in her heart, and she loved, especially her son. Next is Hannah. I spoke about Hannah a few years ago on Mother's Day. She struggled with her own self-worth because of a lack of ability to have children in a society which placed high emphasis on that very thing for many years. She fervently and persistently prayed and then kept a costly commitment to give Samuel, her son, back to God when he was weaned. This picture of Hannah handing over a toddler Samuel in a coat that she had made for him makes me really emotional every time I see it. She sang a song of praise to the God who had given her the son she asked him for, but she sang it as she handed him back to live in the temple as she promised. When Mary sang the Magnificat that you may know, thanking God for choosing her to be the mother of the Messiah, it was echoing the song of praise sung by Hannah, who had been granted a son many years before. Anna is next. Anna is a daughter of Phanuel in the New Testament, a prophetess in the temple, who with Simeon saw the infant Jesus. It's widely thought that she'd been a widow for 84 years, so she would have been well over 100, and it's thought she spent her entire life praying, worshipping and prophesying in the temple, waiting for the fulfillment that God had told her, and that she would see the Messiah. In a way that we will probably never understand, her prayers and worship, led by the Holy Spirit, led up to the point when Jesus was presented to her. She may not have understood the full implication of her life either, but once again she was obedient and zealous and did what she was asked to do, even though that probably meant not having any biological children of her own. The next woman in the Bible is Deborah. The Bible doesn't reserve motherhood only for women with biological children. Judges 5 identifies the prophet and judge Deborah as a mother in Israel, but she was also a mother to Israel. She provided wisdom and, under God's leading, showed Israel the way they were to go. She even tried to encourage her grown child to follow God on his own, without her constant presence. Because of Deborah's wisdom, guidance, Israel enjoyed a rare period of peace. All women can follow Deborah's example to encourage, nurture and train those around them to live mature, effective and godly lives. The next picture is called A Mother's Sacrifice. And the next women from the Bible I want to mention are the midwives, Pharaoh's daughter and Moses' mother. This is a wonderful story of quiet, caring and motherly nurturing between the many women taking part in the story. Pharaoh had given orders for every Israelite boy to be killed at birth, but the midwives were God-fearing and so lied to the authorities under God's instruction. God blessed their obedience and protection of life. The word midwife, I need to mention by the way, means with woman. And how Pharaoh thought that the midwives could harm the very people who they'd spent their lives protecting and nurturing is testament to his lack of compassion and complete lack of understanding. Moses' mother nurtured and cared for her son and trusted God in the plan. His sister watched and helped. Pharaoh's daughter loved and adopted Moses and became part of the plan to look after him, which in turn helped him become the godly man instrumental in leading the people of God out of Egypt. As you can see from these few examples of mothers in the Bible, there were many different types, and the concept is still continuing today. In a school where my husband and daughter have worked in Middlesbrough, the worst insult a student can give to another is "ya mam." More fights and arguments and disorders have been broken up because of these two words than any other. Basically, dissing or disrespecting someone's mother is the worst thing one teenager can do to another, and it will not be tolerated by them. Many a massive fight has been broken up, and when the question of what the spark that began the whole incident was, "He called me mam," and that cannot go untested. This is a really difficult area where families are often chaotic and broken, and kids often don't know which family member they're going to be staying with that night, and there are many drugs and alcohol problems. I also want to mention some modern day mothers in my talk as well. And the first one I want to start with is Mother Teresa. She's probably one of the best known mothers who didn't actually have any biological children. She mothered and cared for whole areas and whole countries of people, especially in India. She fought at the highest level for improvements of their lives. She also lived out Christ's calling and shared the gospel everywhere she went. Next one is Susanna Wesley. She was the mother of Charles and John, specifically, the founders of the Methodist movement. She actually had 19 children, many of whom died, sadly. She was abandoned by her husband for long periods of time, and that she never gave up living out her life for Christ and teaching her children God's love and authority, praying, praising and teaching by her example. And many of you will have heard of the example that Susanna gave of when she wanted to pray, would pull her pinny over her head so that the children knew that's what she was doing. But she lived out her life so much so that her children went on to change the face of Christian worship in Britain and bring many, many people to saving relationship with Jesus. The next woman is Heidi Baker, an American woman who with her husband Roland has worked steadfastly in Mozambique for many, many years, setting up orphanages and fighting for the rights of the very poorest of the poor in our world. She's called Mama Heidi by all her children and calls them all sons and daughters. She works through the power of the Holy Spirit and is such a spirit-filled woman. She is a favourite of mine, and I love to listen to her blogs and video talks and her written word. Iris Ministries is the name of the organisation that she has set up. And I don't actually think she has any biological children of her own. The next woman is Sojourner Truth. She was an African-American Christian woman who escaped from slavery in 1826 and then went to court against a white middle-class man to get her son back. She won and was the first person to do that. She became an author, a preacher and a human rights activist, and if you can read her biography, you will be very encouraged by her. It would be very easy to read about the lives of these amazing Christian women and feel we're not living up to the standard of motherhood or even womanhood. Everyone feels like that at times, and that they're not living up to some standards that we make up for ourselves. As most Christian mothers can tell you, it's difficult to balance the natural instinct to protect one's child from harm with the necessity to equip the child for life as an adult, to feel affection for them, to approve of, to like and have a kind attitude towards them, as in Titus 2:4. At the same time, a mother is to train her children to live godly lives, Psalm 78:5-6, and to discover how they personally contribute to God's kingdom, as in Proverbs 22:6. This is not an easy task. I listened recently to a radio interview of Claudia Winkleman, and she had a very funny way of talking about the guilt and balance of caring and organising her children and let them make their own decisions, and going through some difficulties of her own to make them into rounded people. She talks about curling, and everyone thought she meant something about curling her children's hair. But what she really meant was just like the sport of curling, as they polish the ice to make it smoother before the stone glides over the ice. She was trying to do that with her children's lives. So she has a tracking device on her children's phones and saw where they were. And if the weather was bad, she would order a taxi to pick them up. She would check their bank accounts. Once she saw her son was passing a fast food outlet that he liked, and he didn't have any money in his account, so she added some. You can see this is fine when the children are younger, but not particularly helpful as they get older and may need to make decisions for themselves and learn about life. Sorry, I've just lost my place temporarily. We can know that God is the perfect parent, and I can see often that he's done a little curling, and sometimes a lot, for my life because he loves me. But I also know that when I'm going through really difficult times, he's still with me every step of it. But precisely because he loves me, he doesn't take the difficulty away, because he wants me to learn and change and grow closer to him. The same spirit that lives or lived in the mothers we've looked at today is available in us today. In Matthew 28:18, Jesus says, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me." He then goes on to tell us that we can do the same because of him. We're not called to be the same as these amazing mothers or live the same lives as them, but he's given us all to do a job to do. And we just need to ask what that is. We can be sure that he is with us every step of the way. And I want to share encouragement about mothers and mothering to conclude. When John asked me to do this talk, he mentioned that I was a mother to many people in church, which I took as a great compliment. As like all mothers and fathers, I feel like I'm not really doing much in a fairly ordinary way, day to day. Also, it's a lesson in the fact that having biological children is only a very small part of the whole thing. As your children grow, you realise that they're with you for such a short time. I can also say there are many fathers and mothers in this church and other places who cared for and guided me in my life, especially after the death of my own mother was the reason I started searching for Jesus in the first place. The lady I spoke about at the beginning of the story, who was devastated at the thought of another child to look after, went on to love and cherish him, and many others like her, and I would guess he's a grown man with children of his own now. There are many Christians working with people who need extra help. Safe Families for Children is one, and I advise you to have a look at their website if you haven't already. Cornerstone is a very good example of a Christian organisation caring for children who need a new family. We can work together as a family to fill in gaps in each other's lives when needed. I know that many of us are very aware that one of our church family's great and nurturing mothers, Donna, is no longer with us today, and we feel that loss. With gladness that we've had her with us for a while, but with sadness that she's not with us now. We do pray especially for Stuart, Ben, Anna and Katie today. Psalm 68 says, God sets the lonely into families, and that's what we are, All Saints Church family. And I'm so glad that I am a part of the family of God. I've been washed in the fountain and cleansed by his blood. And I pray that we're all blessed today by God. Amen.